in the dead of night. A simple package arrives at the door. No note, no return address. Just a small box, and the sound of iron gates swinging shut. What would you do if your perfect life suddenly locked you inside your own mind? Tonight, the gates close forever.
Good evening, Night Owls, to the final chapter of Tales That Terrify, Series 2. I'm your host, Felix Lebetsky, and I am currently here again on location at our favorite felines, where we have cats, kitty cats of all sizes and shapes, just waiting for you to come and take them away to their forever home. The Iron Gate by Margaret Millar, one of the most chilling psychological rides ever pulled from the Hitchcock vaults. A story of buried secrets, iron gates, and a mind that may be its own prison. If you're listening with the lights on, you might want to turn them off now. This one's going to stay with you. Let's begin. The dream began quietly. She and Mildred were in a room, and Mildred was curled up in a chair writing. "What are you writing, Mildred?" Lucille said. "You were writing. What are you writing?" Slowly, dreamily, Mildred smiled. "Nothing. I have finished. I have quite finished." And she rose and walked through the window into the snow. "You mustn't go out just in your dress like that, Mildred. You'll catch cold." "No, I'm going away. I've quite finished." "No, it's dark. It's snowing." But she walked away inexorably, leaving no tracks, casting no shadow. "Mildred, come back! The back of your head is open." "No. You're bleeding. You'll make the park untidy." "I'm going away," Mildred called back softly. "Goodbye, dear. Goodbye, Lucille." She walked on between the trees and up and over the hills. With each step she became smaller and smaller, yet more and more distinct, as if neither time nor space had the power to blur her details. Now and then she turned around, and she was always smiling, like a little doll. "Little doll!" Lucille cried. "Little doll!" "Away," came the answer, soft as a whisper, but so clear. "Goodbye. Goodbye, dear." Eternally she walked and bled and smiled, and grew clearer and clearer. Lucille awoke, suffocating, sick with horror at this tiny thing moving across her mind. No bigger than a finger, a match, a pin. She sprang from her bed and pulled aside the curtains that shrouded the window. She looked out, and there was the park. There were the trees, the hills, trackless snow. But Mildred had been dead for 16 years. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang out the Sunday sound of a city. She became suddenly conscious of how grotesque she would appear if Andrew should walk in and find her like this, crouched beside the window, scanning the snow for his dead wife. She rose and turned and caught sight of herself in the mirror. She had forgotten the mirror was there, and for an instant before she had time to set her face, she seemed a stranger, a lady in a mirror, no longer young, wearing a blue nightgown, with her red gold hair swinging against her shoulders in two long, thick braids. She paused to look at the stranger, smiling faintly because it was only a game, yet uneasily because games were never just games. Andrew said there had to be some motive behind them. Perhaps even after 15 years, that's how she still felt, like a stranger in the house, visiting someone else's husband and someone else's children. "Oh, nonsense," she said aloud, and walked quickly towards the mirror, and the stranger moved and grew and became herself. "What utter nonsense." Her tone was the one she used with Andrew and the children, half severe, half humorous, completely understanding. The "I'm smiling, but I mean it" voice. The sound of it was so familiar that automatically the accompanying facial pattern sprang into place. Her eyes lost the strange, anxious look and became kindly and intelligent. Her full, firm mouth softened, one eyebrow rose a little. That's better. This is how I really am. This is me, Lucille Marlowe. Mildred wasn't important anymore, though her portrait still hung on the living room wall, and now and then she bobbed up and dreamed. Fat Cupid doll carved out of soap, Lucille thought. Something doughy and sticky you couldn't get off your hand. She picked up a brush and began to brush her hair vigorously. With each stroke, the dream receded, and the doll blurred and melted. Her moment of insecurity had passed and left her with a more conscious sense of possession. This was her hand, her brush, her house, her husband whistling in the adjoining room. Only the children could never belong to anyone but Mildred. For Andrew's sake, Lucille had tried to like them and make them like her in return. But they remained Mildred's children, and she was uneasy with them, and the most she ever achieved was an own truce. Still, there were no longer children. Polly was getting married this week, and someday Martin would marry, and she and Andrew would be left alone in this house. With Edith, of course, but she didn't count. Her hand paused. She gazed into the mirror and saw the future stretching out in front of her, a length of red velvet carpet covered with a marquee. She dressed quickly and coiled her hair in a coronet around her head. Like a queen, she moved out into the hall, proudly but cautiously, as if she must test the red velvet carpet and measure the height of the marquee. She walked down the stairs, enjoying the sound of her taffeta morning coat following her with oblivious little noises like a genteel servant. Upstairs, a door slammed, and Andrew's voice shouted, "Lucille! Wait a minute, Lucille!" Paused at the bottom of the steps. "What is it, Andrew?" "What happened to my scarf?" Lucille checked on an impulse to say, "What scarf?" He said, "All your scarves are in your bureau drawer. All except this one, and this is the one I want to wear." "Natural." "What did you say?" Lucille raised her voice. "I said naturally. The one you want to wear is the one that isn't there." "It's the other way around," Andrew shouted. "The one I wanted to wear is the one—" "All right," Lucille said, smiling. "What does it look like?" "Blue, dark blue with little gray things on it." He came to the head of the stairs and gesticulated. "Little gray things like this." He was a tall, gray-haired man, nearly 50 now, but he was still slim, and he had the quick, vigorous movements that characterized his son Martin and his sister Edith. His features were thin, almost delicate, but he had large, soft brown eyes which gave his face an oddly guileless expression and caused him trouble now and then with his women patient. Like many real good-natured men, when he tried to look cross, he overdid it. He sent a ferocious scowl down the steps at his wife. "Somebody gave it to me for Christmas last year," he said. "I did," Phil said serenely, "and it's not blue, it's black. Have you looked under your bed?" "Yes." "Andrew, why? Why do you always look under beds for things first?" "It's the logical place. So much room. Lucille, you wouldn't come up and—" "I wouldn't," Lucille said. "If I came up and found it for you, it would only make you crosser." "I promise." "No." She turned calmly and walked away, flinging over her shoulder. "Try the cedar closet in the hall." Ignoring Andrew's noises of distress, he went into the dining room. Edith and Polly were already at breakfast. Edith was buttering a piece of toast with precise, contemptuous movements of one who despises food as a necessary evil to be gotten over with as quickly as possible. Polly, a cup of coffee in front of her, was smoking and gazing dreamily out of the window. "Good morning, Edith," Lucille said. She bent over Edith's chair, and the cheeks of the two women touched briefly. It was a routine and long-standing. They were fond of each other, in a dry, expedient way, for they were the same age and they were interested in the same thing, Andrew. "Good morning, Polly." "Morning," Polly said, without taking her eyes from the window. "Good morning," Edith said. "Sleep well?" "Fine. More than I did." Her voice was so high and sharp that it seemed ready to break into hysteria, a snap of the death twang like a violin string. Every year it seemed to Lucille that Edith's voice got higher, that the string was pulled more and more taut, and played a thin, sinister obbligato over the most ordinary remarks. "What is all the shouting about?" Edith said. "If you want fresh toast, ring for Annie. I told her to have it ready. Sometimes I think Andrew likes to shout simply for the sake of shouting." Lucille sat down, smiling, and unfolded her napkin. "Perhaps." I've seen him at the office simply oozing quiet charm. And when he gets home, he howls. He does, he really howls. He couldn't find a scarf he wanted, Lucille said. He felt suddenly and absurdly happy. He wanted to laugh out loud. He felt the laughter forming in her throat, and she had to force it down. She couldn't explain to Edith or Polly that she wanted to laugh, because this room was warm and bright, because it had begun to snow outside, because Andrew couldn't find something and had looked under the bed. She looked at Edith and Polly, and for a minute she loved them both utterly, because she was so pleased with herself and the beautiful quiet life she had built out of nothing. I love you, my dears, my dears. I can afford to love you because I have everything I want, and neither of you can take anything away from me. Andrew never could find anything, Edith said, and the closer it is to him, of course, the more trouble he has finding it. I suppose it's psychological. Polly stirred slightly. What is it? She said. No, don't tell me. Finding things, Edith said. I expect Freud would say that you only find the things you really want to find. Some people have the most wonderful gift for finding money. There's a man in New York. Polly, it'd be nice if you sat up straight. What for? Polly said. You look as if you had the curvature of the spine all huddled up like that. I'm not huddled. I'm relaxed. The table is no place to relax. Okay, Polly said without resentment, and uncoiled herself from the chair. For a minute she remained upright, and then she propped her elbows on the table and supported her head in her hand. Her long black hair swung silkily over her wrist. Honestly, said Edith, in an affectionate aspiration. Lucille remained quiet. She no longer made any attempts to discipline her stepchildren, and even when she was especially annoyed with one of them, she had enough self-control to refrain from comment. She had always tried to be fair to them, and when they disagreed with their father, she often forced herself to take their side against them. But in spite of her efforts, they had remained aloof and careful. Perhaps it's because they were at a difficult age when I married Andrew, Lucille thought. Polly was the only 10 and Martin 12, and they were both so fond of Mildred, Lucille thought, and found that the laughter in her throat had evaporated like the bubbles in a stale drink. Though I never relax myself, Edith said, sitting very upright. I don't mind others relaxing in the proper place. It depends on the personality, whether you can or can't. Mildred, Lucille said. Mildred had a very relaxed personality. She hadn't said the name aloud for years. She didn't want to say it now, but she forced the words out. Her moment of complete happiness had gone, and it was as if the warm, bright room had led her on and deceived her, and she must cast a corpse into it for revenge. Yes, I know, Lucille said in confusion, conscious of Polly's hard, steady stare. I'm very sorry. Today of all days, Edith said. I'm sorry, Edith. I'm glad you are. Today of all days, we don't want to be reminded of unpleasant things. We must make a good impression on Mr. Fromm. Lieutenant Fromm, Polly said, and you needn't bother about the impression. I made that weeks ago. Still, we are your family, my dear. He's not marrying you. Edith blushed and said sharply, I realize that he's not marrying me, and that no one ever has, if that's what you're getting at. Please, Polly said, and got up and planted a quick kiss on her aunt's cheek. I didn't mean that, silly. I meant I hate fusses, and so does Giles. I don't want this to be today of all todays. Giles curled up and died if he thought he was putting anyone out by coming here. Then he's too sensitive, Edith said crossly. I know he is. That's why I'm glad he's got me. I'm not. She put her arm around her aunt's shoulders and whispered in her ear. Lucky I'm not sensitive, or how could I have stood all your crabbing? Crabbing? Edith's mouth fell open. Really, Polly, as if I'd ever stooped to crabbing. You do crab, Polly said, laughing, and he makes speeches. Well, I never. The nerve of it. Confess it now, or I'll tickle you. Oh, you sit down right this minute and behave yourself. Edith smoothed her ruffled hair and feelings. You and your jokes. You're worse than Martin. As if I ever made speeches. Do I, Lucille? Never, Lucille said with a smile. You see, Polly? But as soon as Lucille was brought into the conversation, Polly's mood changed. Her face became a blank. Her eyes fixed themselves coldly on Lucille, and Lucille read in them, See how nicely we get along without you. This is how you've been spoiling things for us all these years. I don't believe in making speeches, Edith said. I think the tongue is a much overrated organ. Isn't it? Polly said absently. strolled over to the window, her square shoulders outlined in the light. Lucille glanced at her and was struck again by the difference between Polly and the rest of the family. There was something compact and uncompromising and stubborn about even the way she was built. She was rather short, and though slim, she gave the impression of sturdiness and durability. She did not expend her energy haphazardly and aimlessly like Martin and Edith. She moved with a kind of lazy competence, and she did nearly everything well, and was at home anywhere. Her features had the soft roundness of her mother's, and she was, like her, fundamentally a tranquil person. But where Mildred's tranquility had been deepened by happiness and security, Polly's had been warped and hardened by years of an implacable hatred of her stepmother. Perhaps with Martin alone I would have been successful, she thought. He's a man and more pliant. But Polly seemed already grown up at 10. She distrusted me, as a grown woman distrusts another woman whose house she has to share. Edith has finished her coffee, and her long, thin fingers drummed restlessly on the tablecloth. She had finished one thing, breakfast, therefore she must start another thing at once. Whether the activity was her own or someone else's did not matter. She was constantly on the move and setting other people in motion. "I wish Andrew would hurry," she said. "I expect Martin to be late, of course. I think I'd better grow up to see what's keeping him." "Lots of time," Polly said. "Giles' furlough doesn't begin officially until noon, and it won't take us over an hour to drive out to the camp." "I understand," Lucille said, rather shyly, "that officers have leaves and enlisted men have furloughs." Polly shrugged and said without turning around, "Oh, do you? I think I heard it somewhere." "Really?" "Of course, so did I," Edith said hurriedly, "though I prefer to call it furlough. It sounds so much more important, Polly. Why Andrew and Martin insist on driving out with you, I don't know." "They want to look him over first," Polly said. "And then if he doesn't measure up, they can dispose of the body someplace and bring me on home, teary but intact." Edith tried to look shocked. "I'm sure such an idea never entered Andrew's head." "I was joking, darling." "What a way to joke!" "But the main idea, I suppose, is to give Giles the impression of male solidarity behind me. None of your funny work, Frome or else. Be good to our little Polly, that sort of thing." "I consider it quite touching," Edith said. "Yes, isn't it? And so redundant. They both know that since I have decided on Giles, nothing in this world can stop me from marrying." She glanced briefly at Lucille. "I'm glad you feel like that," Lucille said quietly. "It's bad policy to interfere with marriages." The girl flushed and turned away again. "There is altogether too much fuss made about marrying," Edith said. "When I was young, I naturally had some experience with moonlight and roses, but the roses nearly all turned out to be crepe paper ones from the dime store, and the moonlight no better than a street lamp, not so good for seeing folks." She smiled affectionately at Polly's back. "But I expect you've known that for years." "Off and on," Polly said. "I lapse. This is my nicest lapse." "I'm really very anxious to see him," Edith said with a break in her voice. "It's so hard to believe you're old enough to be getting married. It seems like yesterday. I never thought you'd get sentimental about me." "As if I'd ever get sentimental," Edith said, and briskly pushed back her chair. "I'm going to hurry Andrew along. If he looks for the scarf much longer, he'll have the whole house torn up." She went out in a flutter of silk and sachet. Left alone with her stepmother, Polly came back to the table and poured herself another cup of coffee. Because she felt embarrassed with Lucille, she focused her eyes carefully on the object on the table, examining and appraising them as if she were at an auction. A silver coffee urn with gold glass flame under it, red cups on white saucers, the remains of Edith's breakfast, 2 pieces of toast sagging against the toast rack, a bald and imperturbable boiled egg in a red bowl, and a corner of Lucille's blue sleeve. "I'm glad Giles could get his furlough," Lucille said politely. Polly did not look up. "So am I, naturally." 3 weeks, is it?" "Yes." "And you're being married on Friday? 5 more days?" "We have to wait for the license, then we'll go down to the registry office and get the mumbo-jumbo over with and be off." "Where are you going?" Polly shrugged. "Here or there, it doesn't matter." No, I guess not, Lucille said, and two were silent again. In the hall, there were sounds of laughter and running footsteps, and a few seconds later, Martin came bursting into the room. His hair was rumpled and his tie wasn't tied, but he had the self-assurance and smiling arrogance of a man who had achieved success early and easily. He had had his back broken when he was a child, and sometimes his walk was stiff and painful, but he never talked about it, and he was almost always smiling. And if he lived a secret bitter life of his own behind the smile, he never let on. He looked so much like his father that Lucille's lips curved involuntarily when she saw him, and her eyes were soft as a lover. Edith just flung me down the stairs, Martin said cheerfully. What in the hell's the hurry? It's only 9:30 and the big four don't meet till noon. He pulled out a chair and sat down and ran his two hands over his hair to smooth it. In the process, he knocked over a cup on the table and narrowly missed Polly's head with his elbow. I don't think Giles is going to like you, Martin, Polly said crisply. You're too violent. Of course Giles will like me. I'm going to give him lots of advice. Tell him everything a young man in his condition should know. 29, darling. A year older than you are, but totally lacking in experience. Polly made a face at him. So far, Martin hadn't even looked at Lucille, but she knew the omission was not deliberate as it would have been in Polly's case. She did not want to call attention to herself by speaking, so she watched the two of them in silence, forgetting Mildred and taking pride in the fact that these were Andrew's children, and both of them so good-looking and dark and clever. Martin was literary editor of the Toronto Review, and very young for his job. Polly had taken her degree in sociology at the university, and for 4 years had worked in various settlement houses doing everything from investigating cases to helping deliver babies. Is that my egg? Martin said, pointing to the red bowl. Nobody can own an egg, Polly said. They're so impersonal. I can. Don't take it, Lucille said, laughing. It's not very warm. Annie will make you another. But Martin had already sliced the top off the egg and was choosing a piece of stale toast from the rack. Lucille poured his coffee for him and then rose to leave. She would have liked to stay on at the table as she usually did on Sundays, but she knew she'd be in the way. Martin and Polly were already deep in the discussion of how Martin should and should not behave to Giles. Do not be funny, Polly said, and above all, do not slap him on the back or ask him what his officer's swagger stick was for. Everyone asks him that, and it's very embarrassing because he doesn't know. And above all, Lucille closed the door softly behind her. She stood for a moment in the hall, uncertain of herself and her position, not sure what to do or where to go. She had a sudden thought of recognition. I've been here many times before, she thought. Alone in a hall with the doors closed against me, a stranger, a tramp. She had a vision of herself, her body bent forward in lines of furtiveness like a thief about to tiptoe past a sleeping policeman. Then, from upstairs, she heard Edith's voice raised in angry solicitude. I do believe you've given yourself a fever, Andrew, and abruptly everything became normal. The policeman woke, the thief was caught, and put neatly behind bars, and Lucille's thoughts folded and packed themselves into their proper files. My dear Edith, Andrew's voice was raised to, and he sounded nervous and irritable. He doesn't want Polly to get married, Lucille thought. He still thinks of her as a little girl. How can anyone give himself a fever? You know very well what I meant, Edith said. You're coming down with a cold, and it's a lot of nonsense anyway, just dashing out in the snow to meet me. My dear Edith, I'm not dashing out into the snow. I intend to conduct myself in a dignified manner in a closed car with a heater providing, you know very well, providing I'm allowed into privacy to get dressed. All right, get double pneumonia. Dear heaven, Andrew said, and a door slammed. Lucille walked down the hall, thinking, with a smile, of Edith. Poor Edith. She thrives on imminent catastrophes and likes to think of herself as the great aviator of them. I could do the menus and make out the shopping fist for tomorrow, and I wonder if Giles is allergic to anything. She went into the small book-lined room that Andrew called his den. The sun hadn't reached his side of the house yet, and the room was gloomy and smelled of unused books. She turned on the lamp and sat down in Andrew's chair and stretched out her hand for a memo pad and a pencil. She began to plan the menus for the week, and with one eye on rationing and the other on Annie's limitations in the kitchen, lobster, if available, and a roasting chicken. mushrooms, or perhaps an eggplant. She bent over the pad, frowning. She wanted everything to be perfect for Giles, not because he was Giles and about to marry Polly, but because she was Lucille. She had the subtle but supreme vanity that often masquerades under prettier names: devotion, unselfishness, and generosity. It lay in the back of her mind, a blind, deaf, and hungry little beast that must always be fed indirectly through a pole. While she planned, she drew pictures absently on the back of the memo pad. Vaguely, though, a sea of lobsters and shrimp, she heard Edith's voice calling her. "Still, where on earth are you?" "In here, in the den." Edith came rushing through the door with an air of challenging a high wind. "I think Andrew's caught a cold," she said with a tragic gesture. "Today of all days. His face is quite flushed." "Excitement," Lucille said. Edith was smoking, and her pallor, seen through a veil of smoke, reminded Lucille of oysters. "Oysters," she said. Edith looked a little surprised. "I loathe oysters, unless they're covered with something fried." "Yes. I don't like the color of the things." "Neither do I," Lucille said calmly, and added oysters to the list. "Though I wasn't, as a matter of fact, talking about oysters," Edith said with a certain coldness. "I was talking about Andrew. I think you should be sensible and stay home today." "Oh, leave him alone, Edith." Seeing her sister-in-law's color rise, she added quickly, "Andrew hates to be babied. The best thing you and I can do is to stay out of everyone's way. Leave the three of them together. In a way, it's their morning. We mustn't interfere. For the present, we're outsiders." Edith looked as if she were about to continue arguing, then with a sudden twist of her shoulders, she turned and sat down at the edge of the desk. "You're so reasonable, Lucille," she said, almost complainingly. "I don't know how you do it. Always putting yourself in some other person's place and coming out with exactly the right solution. It's extraordinary." "I've had a lot of practice," she contended, and smiling, she leaned back and touched her hair lightly with the tips of her fingers. The little beast had been fed and had stopped gnawing for a moment. A few minutes later, Edith went out, and Lucille sat with the memo pad on her knee, patiently waiting for Andrew to come and say goodbye to her, but he didn't come. "He's forgotten." "Well, of course he has. He's with his children. It's their day, after all. I said it myself." "But he has forgotten you." "Well, of course. I'm not a dewy-eyed bride anymore." She got up and went to the window and stood waiting to catch a glimpse of him as he left the house. She saw the three of them going up the driveway, close together, arm in arm, with the snow whirling around them. They seemed like a compact unit, indivisible and invulnerable. While she watched, a squat, dark cloud moved across the sun like a jealous old woman. Lucille stood, wanting to cry out, "Andrew! Andrew! Come back!" as she had cried out to Mildred in the dream. But no sound came from her lips, and after a moment she went back to her chair and lighted a cigarette and picked up the memo pad again. She looked down at the pictures she had drawn while she was planning the menu. There were women's faces, the faces of fat, silly Cupid doll women. They smirked and simpered at her from the paper and tossed their coy ringlets and fluttered their eyelashes. Detachedly, almost absently, she burned out their eyes with the end of the cigarette. 2. Around noon on Sunday, December 5th, the Montreal Flyer was derailed about 20 miles from Toronto. The cause of the derailment was not known, but it was hinted in the first radio reports that it was the work of saboteurs, for the train had been passing a steep bank at the time, and the number of people killed and wounded was very high. Volunteer doctors and nurses were asked to come to Castleton, the nearest hospital. Edith heard the news on the radio, but paid little attention to it beyond thinking fleetingly that death and catastrophe were so common these days that one had to be personally involved to get excited about it. All volunteer doctors and nurses report at once to Castleton Hospital. Kings Highway number. She rose, yawning, and turned the radio off just as Lucille came in. "What was that?" Lucille asked. "Some train wreck." "Oh, lunch is ready. Any calls for Andrew this morning?" 2. Years ago, Edith had appointed herself to answer Andrew's calls on Sunday. She said wistfully, "Remember the old days when I used to spend nearly the whole day at the phone?" "Andrew is sensible not to work so hard," Lucille said. "His assistant is perfectly capable. Still, it was rather fun to be so busy." "Not for Andrew," she smiled, but she was annoyed with Edith for bringing the subject up. She and Edith, between them had made the decision that Andrew was to retire, at least partially. Now that he had, Lucille was beginning to doubt her own wisdom. Andrew's health was better, but he had spells of moodiness. Doctors are too hard on themselves, she said, as if to convince herself. That's why so many of them die young. Don't talk about dying young. It upsets my digestive tract. She turned away, biting her lower lip. It makes me think of Mildred. I can't help wishing you hadn't referred to her this morning, especially in front of Polly. I'm really sorry. It just slipped out. You'll have to be careful. She might not want Giles to know how Mildred died. He's probably told him already. No, I don't think so. Such a terrible thing. Edith closed her eyes, and Lucille saw that the lids were corpse gray with blue veins going on them like mold. So bloody, Edith said. So bloody. Edith, you mustn't. Lucille put out her hand and touched Edith's thin, pallid arm. Come along and have your lunch. I couldn't eat a thing. Certainly you can. No, just remembering it upsets me. We'll see, Lucille said, a trifle grimly. She walked out, leaving Edith to wonder wistfully behind her like a little unloved ghost. Lucille estimated the situation and acted as usual with good sense. Giving any sympathy or encouragement, Edith would mope herself into indigestion or a migraine. Sweetbreads for lunch, Lucille said cheerfully. Edith brightened at once. In spite of her tug of her conscience, she saw Mildred floating away out of her mind, and the blood frothing into yards and yards of beautiful pink gauze trailing Mildred down the ears. I adore sweetbreads, she said. She ate too heartily and had indigestion anyway, and by 2:30 she had begun to fidget because Andrew and the children hadn't returned. Lucille tried to calm her and succeeded only in making herself nervous and impatient. At 4 o'clock, Lucille built a fire in the living room grate to cheer them up. But the wood was damp, and the flames crept feebly up along the log like dying fingers beckoning for help. They should be here, Edith said. They should be here. I can't think what has happened. Probably nothing at all, Lucille said, and poked the log again and turned it. I told you that wood wouldn't burn. My dear Edith, Lucille said, it is burning. Not really burning. I'm surprised at Andrew worrying me like this. I'm surprised at him. He should know better. How could Andrew know you were going to eat too much and make yourself nervous? You're going too far, Lucille. I should have said that 2 hours ago. It carries a nasty implication, Edith said coldly, as if I would not worry about Andrew if I hadn't eaten too much, which I'm not admitting in the first place. I think you might. The telephone in the hall began to ring. The two women looked at each other but did not move. Aren't you going to answer it, Edith? It's probably a call for Andrew. Edith didn't hear her. An accident, she whispered. I know, an accident. Don't be silly, Lucille said, and went out to answer the phone herself. The operator's nasal voice twanged along the wire. A collect call from Castleton for Miss Andrew Morrow. Will you accept the call? This is Miss Morrow. Yes, I'll take it. Here's your party. Go ahead. Hello, Lucille said. Hello? For a moment there was no reply, but a confused background of sound. Then, hello, Lucille, this is Polly. What happened? There's been an accident. Polly? No, not ours. We sort of happened into it, and Father and I are staying to help. There's a little hospital here. That's where I'm phoning from. Polly, you sound funny. Maybe I do. I've never seen a train wreck before. Anyway, I'm in a hurry. There aren't enough doctors and nurses. Tell Edith not to worry. Goodbye. Wait, when will you be home? When they could spare us. Martin and Giles are helping get the bodies out. Goodbye. Goodbye, Lucille echoed. Edith was tugging at her sleeve. What is it? Nothing much, Lucille said. There's a train wreck and Andrew's helping. How awful, Edith said. But the words meant nothing to Lucille. She was looking over Edith's shoulder, smiling. Andrew was safe. Her world was safe. All the trains on Earth were of no importance if Andrew wasn't on it. She hurried back into the living room to stir up the fire. Andrew would be tired when he came home. He would like a fire and a hot toddy. But no matter how hard she worked, the wood refused to burn. She rose to her feet, dusty and defeated. Slowly she moved her head, and her eyes met Mildred's. Mildred, whole and happy and done in oils, and changeless. Mildred, still a nuisance after 16 years, having to be dusted once a day and sent away to be cleaned when her plump white shoulders showed scurf. Lucille looked at her bitterly, but Mildred's soft, sweet mouth did not alter, and her blue eyes, undimmed by time or tears or hate, stared forever at a piece of wall. It's all coming back to me, Edith said. What? Lucille said. What? The wreck I was trying to remember. It was when Andrew and I were practically children. I don't remember how it happened exactly, but the train was derailed in some way not a mile from the house. And of course we had to go over as soon as we heard about it. It went on, and Lucille heard only snatches. Hundreds of bodies, yes, hundreds. Very unpleasant for children. Soldiers to help because the other war was on them. In the excitement, Edith's indigestion disappeared, and Lucille acquired a headache. You're becoming more moderate with the years, she said sharply. The last time you told me it was thousands of bodies. Oh, it was not, Edith said, offended. I'm very accurate at numbers. You're not yourself today at all, Lucille. You're quite critical. I have a headache. Go up and lie down then. You're not yourself today, she repeated. I don't want to be down, Lucille said, and was surprised to hear how childish she sounded. Edith and I are not friends, she thought. We get along and laugh together and understand each other, but with only a little less control, we might rail at each other like fish hooks. Very well, I'll be down, she said. She walked abruptly to the door, hoping as she hurried she might defeat Edith by having the last word. But she was not quick enough. Well, I should think so, Edith said. Breathing hard, Lucille went to the staircase and began to ascend. She wanted Edith to hear how briskly and easily she went upstairs, but the deep carpet in her own weariness betrayed her, and the sound she made was the soft, treacherous sound of a panther moving across the uncertain floor of a jungle. She had intended to pass the hall mirror without looking at herself, but now that she had reached it, she couldn't bear to turn her head away and slight an old friend. Hello, she said, working an eyebrow to show herself how whimsical she was being, saying hello to herself. Hello, stranger. She passed down the hall into her own room. As far as anything in the house could be free of Mildred, this room was. In Mildred's day, it had been the guest room because the windows looked out over the park. Mildred had draped the windows herself with yards of suffocating ruffles and net, and visitors saw the park only through a pink fog. Lucille's first act had been to strip off the ruffles and replace them with crisp tailored drapes. There was a chair beside the windows, and here Lucille often sat watching the people in the park. In the winter, the skiers and the children with sleds and toboggans. In the summer, the parade of prams and picnickers and cyclists. There was one very steep hill that hardly any cyclist ever managed to get up, and Lucille found pleasure in estimating at just what point the bicycles would falter, and the rider would dismount and trudge up the rest of the hill. She enjoyed the people who used the park. They were so tiny and harmless, and always making things difficult for themselves by going up and down hills. But she especially loved the cyclists, the ones who never reached the top. Cruelly, she enjoyed their endless and futile activity while the clock on her bureau ticked away the minutes and the years. Outside, it had stopped snowing. The park lay like a silent, lulling woman softly draped in white with hints of darkness in its hollows. Lucille turned from the window. She did not like the park at dusk. For a long time after Mildred died, nobody had gone into the park after nightfall. There were rumors of a man who roamed the hills with an axe in his hand. There were tales of ghosts and half-human animals. But Mildred and the man were soon forgotten, and intrepid children and impatient lovers had driven away the ghosts. Only Lucille remembered the man with the axe. She had never believed in him for an instant, yet some perverse part of her mind had kept him for her in storage. When she was disturbed and restless, he came out from hiding, gently at first, so that she would think he was an old friend. His face was smiling and familiar, and she never saw the axe in his hand or the blood on his clothes until it was too late. Then gradually his face would change and distort into something so grotesque and hideous that she could never describe it in words or even remember when she was feeling calm again. Lucille laughed, and suddenly thinking of Edith. Edith would say, I have repressions, but aloud. Poor Edith. She went to the mirror and began to make up her face for Andrew. If you're tired, Martin said, why not let me drive? Andrew did not take his eyes off the road. Gravel and snow, he said. I think I'd better keep the wheel. Polly's voice came from the back seat. You should know by this time, Martin, that Father thinks nobody can drive as well as he can. Never saw one, Andrew said. The trouble with you, Polly said. The trouble with you, Andrew said, is that you talk too much, my dear. You're likely to give gals the right impression. Gals, Polly said. Do I talk too much? The young man beside her stiffened in order to show her that he was alert and listening to her. But he hadn't heard the question at all. A combination of circumstances had made him so ill at ease that he was aware only of his own problems and discomfort. In the first place, he didn't feel quite at home yet in his officer's uniform. He didn't know what to do with the swagger stick, and though he felt that he should put his arm around Polly, he didn't want to lose the stick or break it. He was, moreover, nervous for Polly's family. How could they talk like this after seeing the wreck and the body? The wreck had affected him more than the others because he was not used to death and sickness, and because it was a little bit like war, and he was going to see a lot of things worse than this. The knowledge clutched his stomach like an iron hand. He sat up straighter. In the headlights of an approaching car, his face was stern and white, and the small, fair mustache he was growing only emphasized his youth and healthlessness. "Forget about it, Giles," Polly said, seeing the misery in his eyes. "Forget about what?" he said stiffly. "Everything." "Oh." He squeezed his hand. "You look awfully nice in your uniform." "Thank you." "I'm sorry we had to run into this today, darling." "Don't be sorry," Giles said. It's all right. It's not your fault." "True," Martin said dryly. He rather liked Polly's young man, but he was in no mood to go easy on him. He himself had been stirred by the wreck to pity and anger, which, in Martin, turned at once into sarcasm. "Martin doesn't want anyone to know he's human," Polly said, "so he'll be biting and snarling for a week now." "Like the cur I am," Martin said. Martin loves snarling. "Don't you both?" Andrew said, suddenly irritated with the road and his children and the endless wrangling and the young lieutenant who wasn't good enough for Polly. "I don't," Polly said. "I get along with everybody." "Lack of taste," Martin said, slumping further on the seat. "Your chief fault." More uneasy than ever, Giles cleared his throat and tried to think of something very correct to say. By the time something occurred to him, Polly and Martin were talking again. Frustrated, he began to beat his stick rhythmically against his knee. The car glided over the treacherous road. On a curve, the wheels slipped and lurched ahead, and the car sprawled sideways in the middle of the highway. "Better reconsider," Martin said. "I'm a heller on snow and gravel." "Kindly shut up, Martin," Andrew said, twisting the steering wheel furiously. "Trying to save trouble," Martin said. "Lucille will blame me if I don't deliver you cozy and safe at the door." "See?" Polly said to Giles. "Now he's biting father. I think we should feed the poor mutt and walk him past a hydrant." "What?" Giles said and blushed. "Oh, I see." Martin grinned into the dark. "You can't blame Polly for being earthy now and then. She had such a wide range of experience. Tell him the case of Miss Palinzinski, Polly." "Not until after we're married," Polly said calmly. Married, Andrew thought, and his fingers dug into the steering wheel. Polly getting married, staking her life on the chance that this young man was clean and decent and responsible and healthy. "I don't like it," Andrew decided. Once the words had formed in his head, the feeling which had been vague before became definite and irrevocable. "I don't think I like him," had become, "I'm determined I'll never like him." Andrew was not given to introspection or self-analysis. He'd been too busy for it all his life. So he thought his judgment of Giles was perfectly impartial and well-considered, and of course correct. "Nearly midnight," Martin said. "Nearly midnight," Giles echoed, and was conscious of a feeling of relief that the day was almost over and tomorrow could be no worse. For the rest of the journey he was silent. Every now and then when they passed a lighted village, he would glance down at Polly's dark fur coat. He had never seen her wearing it before, and it looked very expensive, like the car and Martin's hat and Andrew's watch. In addition to his other fears, he began to be afraid that the Morrows were rich, that they might have servants who would intimidate him, that he wouldn't know which fork to use, or he might slip on a wax floor or break an antique chair. "Anyway, I'm a soldier," he thought. "Anyway, that's more than Martin is. I'm a lieutenant with a whole platoon of my own." He closed his eyes and wished that he could be back where he belonged with his platoon. "Giles," Polly said, "darling, wake up, we're here." He was awake immediately and reached instinctively for his swagger stick. But his mind was confused, and when the car jerked to a stop, he had the impression that Andrew had driven right up onto a veranda, a spacious veranda with huge white pillars. He blinked slowly and looked out the window and saw that the car had stopped under a portico. Between the pillars he could see the dim, sprawling hills of the park. "You take the car in, Martin," Andrew said wearily and climbed out of the car. Martin stood over on the seat. Alright, move yourselves back there. Come on, Giles, Polly said. We'll get out of here. He was still staring out the window at the park. The park, he thought. Their park. Whole damn park in the middle of the city. Come on, Paul, he said. We can moon over the scenery some other time. I'm cold. Giles got out. There was a brisk clumsiness in his movements, as if he hadn't quite got used to his own size. Is it yours? He said. All that? Of course not, Andrew said brusquely. Really, Giles, Polly said, laughing. That's Hyde Park. We happen to live next to it. You'll love it, Giles. Tomorrow we'll walk through it. No, you won't, Andrew said. He turned his back to them and pressed the doorbell. He spoke over his shoulder and his voice sounded thin and distant. I don't want to be tyrannical about this, but I must insist that you stay out of the park. I'm afraid you caught a cold, Father, Polly said. You must stay out of the park, Andrew said. It isn't a nice place. Oh, of course, sir, Giles said stiffly. Of course, sir. I don't like parks. My father is overtired, Polly said. Martin and I often go into the park, especially when we want to ski. It isn't a nice place, Andrew said, and pressed the bell again. Martin came running up the driveway. He had his hat off, and his dark hair was feathered with snow. He threw his hat up in the air and caught it, and let out a shout that was an exultant challenge to the weather. Giles stood, shaken with envy and wistfulness. I'd like to do that, he thought. I could do that. Martin is always uninhibited, Polly said, but especially in the first snow of the year. The portico light went on suddenly, and the door opened. Giles had a confused impression that several women were rushing out at him, all talking at once. We didn't hear the car. Andrew, you didn't tie your scarf. You're not chilled, Andrew. Polly's voice rose above the babble, clear and cold. Come on, Giles, I'll fix you a drink while they're taking Father's temperature. Talk died down, and Giles was able to see now that there were only two women. One of them was tall and thin and looked like Martin, with her dark, curly hair cropped close to her head. She had bright, bird-like eyes and a wide, mobile mouth, and it surprised Giles to hear how high and tight her voice was and how anxious her laugh. This must be Edith, Giles thought. The other woman was taller, and seemed at the same time younger and more mature than Edith. She had the controlled, subdued beauty that plain women sometimes acquire when they have achieved happiness and success and security. Her red gold hair was coiled in a braid around her head. She came toward Giles, holding out her hand and smiling apologetically. We've been terribly rude, she said. You're Giles, of course. I'm Lucy Morrow. He shook her hand, very embarrassed, because he still had his gloves on, and because Polly had flounced ahead into the house without looking back. How do you do? Giles said. And this is Edith, Polly's aunt. Edith, dear, come over and meet Giles. Edith darted at him. She was wearing something that fluttered in the wind, and it seemed to Giles that she was entirely fluid and never stopped moving, talking, smiling, having ideas. Hello, Giles, she said. What a pretty uniform. Don't you think so, Lucille? We're so glad to have you here, Giles. Andrew, please go into the house at once, though you probably have pneumonia already. Nothing I'd like better, Andrew said, and stamped ahead into the house. What a way to talk, Edith slipped her hand inside Giles' arm. Polly's always rude, don't mind her. One of the first things you have to do is teach her some manners. We've never been able to. Giles found himself being guided expertly and firmly into the house and down a hall. He had no time to look around or even think. Edith did not once pause for a breath or an answer. Her hand on his arm like a bird's claw, helpless and appealing, yet somehow grotesque. He thought if he moved his arm, the claw would tighten from fear, and the harder he tried to shake it off, the tighter it would cling. Here we are, Edith said, and thrust him neatly into the living room. Lucille was pouring out the hot toddies. Martin and Polly were sitting on the Chesterfield talking, and Andrew stood in the front of the fire warming his hands. Attention, everybody, Edith said, and Polly, this means you as well as everyone else, because I'm going to make a speech. I knew it, Polly said tragically. I knew it. How could you know it when I just decided myself? Edith said. Besides, it's a very short speech, and I consider this an occasion. And occasions deserve speeches, Martin added, preferably by Edith. Come on over here, Giles. We may be up all night. You will if you keep interrupting me, Edith said. Anyway, I want to welcome you to the house, Giles. We're glad you could come, and we think you'll find us a happy family. He blushed and gave Giles an embarrassed and apologetic smile. I know how sentimental that sounds, but I think it's true. We are a happy family. Of course, we have our lapses. Polly's invariably rude, and Martin's high spirits are a trial. And Edith gets maudlin. Polly said. Oh, I do not, Edith said. And Andrew can never find anything, and then he gets cross. Don't you, Andrew? I may become justifiably irritated, Andrew said, but never cross. As for Lucille, Edith said, and smiled across the room at her sister-in-law. There was a pause, and the room seemed to Giles to become static. It was no longer a real room, but a picture. A man standing, warming his hands at the fire, two women smiling and smiling at each other, three figures on the Chesterfield, relaxed and yet unnatural. Happy family, Giles thought, an ambitious picture painted by an amateur. The smiles of the women were set and false, and the figures on the Chesterfield sprawled ungracefully like stiff-jointed dolls. As for Lucille, Edith said, I don't believe she has any lapses. Lucille laughed softly. Don't you believe her, Giles? I'm the worst of the lot. His eyes met hers, and he felt suddenly warm and understood and contented. The rest of the family, with their constant jokes and squabbles, were a puzzle to him, but he felt that he knew and liked this quiet, beautiful woman. Something stirred in her eyes like mud at the bottom of a pool. I haven't seen you before, she said. Have I? No, Giles said uncertainly. For a moment you reminded me of someone. There, Edith said triumphantly. That's Lucille's lapse. Someone's always reminding her of someone. Lucille said, Life is an endless procession of faces for me. I am always trying to match them up. She picked up her glass and looked into the murky liquid. It seemed to come alive and surged with millions of little faces, winking, frowning, sly, puckering, brooding, bitter, smiling, little faces, incredibly mobile and knowing. She could not close her eyes and blot them out. She knew that it would peer behind her eyelids and that she must walk alone through this delicate, soundless hell. When Giles said goodnight to her, she was still holding the glass, looking into it with bewildered melancholy, like a child trying to comprehend the universe. Good night, Miss Morrow, he said. She raised her head, and in a quick, nervous smile, he saw a flutter of questions. You? Where do you fit in? Have you a place? Have I? Good night, Giles, she said in a composed voice. She glanced across at her husband. Coming, Andrew? It's very late. Very late. Too late. Later than you think. I mustn't let my nerves bother me like this, or I'll dream of Mildred again. Okay, and with that, ladies and gentlemen, we will continue on with part 2 of this long story. That is the first 2 chapters, and come tomorrow, and I will continue on from there with chapters 3 and 4. This story is a really long story, but then again, that's not surprising for it being the finale. So again, part 1, and come back tomorrow for part 2. Hopefully, hopefully it stays just as interesting. As of so far, I don't know what's going to happen. Well, till tomorrow. Good night.